Renee, we're going to talk first about your involvement with the Jewish community, some of the organizations or activities. So tell me a little bit about what you're doing with the Jewish community.
I just chaired an event for Israel Bonds. It's a women's division.
Israeli Bonds has been a big part of what you like to be involved in.
I would say that anything on behalf of Israel has been very important in my life. In my life, in the lives of my children, and most of my friends, all of my friends.
And how have you found the Jewish community here in Dallas? How has it grown over the years?
It has been an immense growth. It's been unbelievably good to me, and one of the other reasons I enjoy being involved is because I feel I have so much to pay back to our community that has been wonderful, friendly, very pro-Israel, very pro my Jewish values, our Jewish values, and it's been very rewarding to me to be able to pay back to community.
Right. It's a good
in
feeling,
many ways.
Isn't it?
It's a very good feeling.
Okay, well let's go back now. You know, we noticed that lovely accent. So we're going to go back to 1929 and we're going to London, England.
Yes.
Now, it was really the heavy depression in the United States. Of course, you were born in London. Did that affect your family too?
I don't think it affected my family because my family, frankly, my parents were immigrants to England. One came from Russia, my mother came from Poland, and they were both working people when they met, and my father was a tailor, and so it did not affect financially. We were not even on, let's say, a medium income level, very strong in many other ways.
Right. Tell me about your grandparents. Do you remember them at all?
I do remember my mother's parents because when my mother came to England, she was a young child and came with her parents and her siblings. So I remember them very, very well.
Yeah.
They spoke very little English. I learned at a very young age to speak Yiddish because that was the only language they really were comfortable with. And that's how we grew up. But we were more affected. Our whole family, our whole Jewish community was more affected by the Second World War than we were by depression, which was not too soon after.
Right. Well, you were a young girl when the war broke out.
Yes.
What was it like in London?
I can't quite say what it was like in London. What I can say is that all elementary age children were evacuated out of London in 1939, prior to the war.
So they were taking precautions before the war even?
A few months before the war, in 39, yes. All children were taken out of London.
How did you leave your parents?
Very difficult. It was very difficult. My younger brother and I were elementary school children. It was compulsory to go, and we were not happy with the place we were taken to.
Now your parents and the adults stayed. Why were they staying?
The parents stayed because the first priority was to move children out. So it wasn't a question of who stayed and who didn't. And besides, by that time, my oldest brother was already at 19, not quite 19, was already drafted into the army. Most of the men of that age were already gone. were already in the Army. My father, who was older, had served briefly in the First World War. Because he was a tailor, he was drafted into a uniform factory. And so that was part of his reason for having to remain, because the plant was in London. And anyhow, it was very hard not only to be separated from our parents, but because it was truly a culture shock for us. Sure. We were brought up in, I guess you would say, cement jungle. We lived in what was considered the northeast part of London, and it was mostly apartment dwellings, or flats as was called, and going to the country where the people were very good, nice people. Most of them really didn't want to take in children. Right. They were obligated. They were obligated to take evacuees into, if they had room. But the people we were billeted with, looking back, were a youngish couple. They didn't seem to be young to us at the time, but had no children of their own, and they were very kind. But we were raised in a kosher home, and we couldn't eat some of the food that was given to us. I mean, we were happy in some other ways. Our school was a little country schoolhouse, and very different to the big school we had gone to in London. I think it was after 6 weeks or maybe 3 months, something. Parents could bring their children back to London, did have the right to do that. So I kept writing. My younger brother was only 5, and kept writing to my parents that if they didn't come to pick us up, we were going to walk home, which of course didn't happen. Eventually my father came and picked us up. And
now were you and your siblings all together?
My one brother, yeah.
Okay,
one younger brother.
You had a total of 5 siblings. Was everybody born already now?
No. I was in the middle. I was the youngest of 4 and the oldest of 3. So my older siblings, one was already in the Army, one was still, who was around 14, 15, and my sister was 8 years older than me, and she was working, and she became an air raid warden in London, still stayed. The family lived in air raid shelters every night. Right. My youngest brother was born in 1940. I didn't know, I didn't even suspect that my mother was expecting a child when she had to have her 5 and 10-year-old children be evacuated. It was in July 1940. By then we were back in London. And some months after that, our family moved from London to Oxford.
Right.
And that's where we lived for the rest of my time in England.
Now, did you go to high school in Oxford?
I went to high school in Oxford.
Okay. After high school now, what were your plans?
I graduated at 16. My original plans were to become a nurse. I was dissuaded, and so instead I had training to become a medical secretary, and worked, had a couple of really good jobs in Oxford. I think most of my jobs were good because most older people were not available. So everybody by then was either in the service or working in a service-related position.
were you starting to make the decision to come to the United States?
My older sister, who was 8 years older than me, married an American soldier in England, who she met, and probably around 43, 44. And she married him in 45 and came to the States on the last troop ship coming home.
What was his mission in the Army? I know he was based in England.
My sister's husband went through the North Africa, Italy campaign, the same campaign that my brother went through in the British Army. But they were based in England.
Right.
So when he came back, or in between maybe is when they met, I'm not sure. It was probably around 1944. They were married in 45, as he was getting out of the Army and coming home. So 5 years later, I decided I wanted to come. She was expecting her first child, and I wanted to come to visit my sister. So I came on a one-year visa and was absolutely going home, going back. I had my passage. I had I could have picked up my job again. My parents, of course, family was still there. And about 6 months after I arrived, I happened to meet my husband.
Now, where were you at this?
In Brooklyn, where my sister lived.
Okay.
My sister lived in Brooklyn. Yeah.
What did your parents think of you guys moving to the United States?
They were very happy for us to do it.
Good.
They felt it would be a better life. They were not able to get visas to come at the time I came. But when I came, they and I thought I was coming back home. It wasn't going to be a permanent thing for me to live in the U.S. After I got married, my sister and I managed to, between us, get, and mostly she, make arrangements, because by then she was able to be an American citizen, and she was able to get visas for my parents to come. So they immigrated about a year after, more than a year after I was married. Yeah.
What about your other siblings? Did they come too eventually?
The two younger brothers came. My oldest brother was still in the service. My second brother had married someone in England and had come out of the Navy by then and was settling down in England, but also had thoughts of coming to the U.S. He never actually did. He did at one point, but didn't work out.
When you got married, what career did your husband get into? What were you doing? Did you get into a career? You become a stay-at-home mom? What were you guys doing?
No, I was already working in a big medical facility in New York when I met my husband, and by coincidence, my husband had already been in the Navy, had been out of the Navy, had taken, he had an undergraduate degree in pre-med, had decided not to go into medicine or dentistry, which he had considered at one point, and was actually on the job training with a small medical supply company. And it's not how I met him, but it turned out that he was selling to the medical center that I was working for. That was another coincidence.
Right.
After I met him, that we were interested in the same areas of work and business.
What was the United States like to you compared to England? It had to be somewhat of a little bit of a culture change.
Much different. Much different. In 1949, England was still under an austerity program. A lot of things were still rationed. A lot of things we still couldn't get. there would have been no likelihood for me to ever go to college or any of my siblings, which the opportunity opened for me later in the U.S. It was a completely different world. There was either low socio and high. There was no middle class at all. So the opportunities for going from here to there was very, although many in my family did bridge it.
You have 3 children. Where were they born?
I had 4 children. I lost my oldest son, and my second son was born who is now the oldest son, was born in Ithaca, New York, and the third and fourth were born in Dallas.
You're from England, your husband's from New York, and now all of a sudden you're coming to Dallas. What prompted it?
Was not all of a sudden. When my husband and I even first started talking marriage, we knew we weren't going to settle in New York. Okay. When he finished his on-the-job training, his first real job was with a pharmaceutical company, a big pharmaceutical company called A.H. Robbins. And the Robbins company were very good to us and transferred us wherever we wanted to go. So we first went from New York to, had lived in Queens, in Flushing in Queens, for 1.5 years. And then we moved to Ithaca, New York, where our second child was born. And then it was frankly too cold, so we asked for a transfer back to the New York area, and we moved back to Long Island, and still with the same company. And then after 3 moves, my husband decided that it was time for him to open a business of his own. So he researched different areas and decided that Dallas would be the place to come to. So we moved here at the end of 1955 with 2 infants, a 2- and a 3-year-old, so that he could open his medical supply business here. For the first several years, I worked with my husband in our business, but then I was able to further my own career. Thanks to my dear husband, Dallas, and U.S., I was able to further my education at the age of 40. I started undergraduate and have a dream I never could have had in England. I might have had the dream, it never could have happened. So it's one of the other things I'm very grateful for, that I was able to start and go through several levels from.
Where'd you go to college here?
I had to start out with English 101. I first went to Eastfield Community College because SMU, I had no documentation to show that I ever went to a high school. So I had to prove myself for 2 years before I could be accepted at SMU. I went to SMU for a bachelor's and master's, and then went on to TW for a PhD. And it's been some of the most fulfilling things I've been able to do. I was able to do that after my oldest son, who passed away, the same year he started, the year he graduated from high school and started college was the year that I started college.
What was Dallas like when you got here?
It was a small town compared to where we had lived before. It's only smaller than New York or London. And it was wonderful. It was wonderful. The people were very friendly in business, and people we became friends with
Did the Jewish community embrace you guys?
Absolutely, absolutely. Not only the Jewish community, but all of the Jewish people in the medical supply were very, very open, friendly, more than friendly, yes. We knew no one here. With my husband's encouragement, I almost immediately became very involved in a couple of Jewish organizations, the National Council of Jewish Women, for instance, and that involvement has stayed with me since the beginning. I'm still involved with all of the the Jewish Federation, Jewish Family Service.
Which one of the projects gives you the
JCC.
most joy?
In terms of the organization that I think does the most good, I would say Jewish Family Service. In terms of the organization that has been the most, let's say, joy in terms of involvement has been the Jewish Community Center. I was involved in it from the time it first moved into, before it even moved into this facility, and way, way, way back. And my children have been very active, not only going to preschool and camp and all of those things, but have held board positions on the board, on our federation, on Jewish Family Service. My sons have held positions on most of the Jewish organizations. My dad came here to Dallas after my mother passed away. They were living in New York close to my sister, who unfortunately passed away in 1966.
Okay.
And my parents remained living in that area. My two younger brothers by then were married and living in New York, the New York area. And anyway, he came here and lived with us for a short time, and then decided he really wanted to be, he was really pretty isolated living with us because he never drove, he never had a car, never drove. And since both my husband and I were working, I became involved here at the JCC. Started to come over and play cards with different people, and then he met these Russian immigrants who had just come and were going to be living in a housing development, low-cost housing, and he decided that's where he wanted to go to live. And he became not only a friend and interpreter to the immigrants, and was awarded lots of awards from Jewish Family Service, but he would go with them if they had doctor appointments, business appointments, whatever, work appointments. He would go with them. He became a big volunteer with Jewish Family Service in that capacity. So he moved into a Hard, lived in a Hard, from the time it was first opened until he died in 1988. He also was in and out of Golden Acres, and during that time that he was either at a Hard or Golden Acres, he was interviewed. Whoever interviewed him probably wasn't around anymore to transcribe it, so there were several different mistakes. His name was spelled incorrectly. It's spelled Lichtman, L-I-C-C-H-T-M-A-N, but it actually was Lichtman, L-I-T-C-H-M-A-N. Bringing it up to Dallas, said, I lost a daughter to leukemia in 1966. That was my oldest sister. And then said another daughter married an American soldier, which was not true. That was my oldest sister married an American soldier, moved here, and it said bringing her younger sister with her. Well, she didn't bring me with her. I came 5 years later. Then it says that same year, the Lichmans, meaning my father and mother and my two younger brothers, along with the two sons, moved to New York City. Well, it was the following year. It was not the same year that I moved. They came in 51. There's a picture at the time of the transfer of the Torah from Ohav Shalom to Golden Acres. He became very, very involved in the Jewish community.
In your lifetime, you've lived through so many momentous events. Obviously, World War II, which was difficult on your family growing up. Here, a president was assassinated. Was there something that really stood out that affected you?
Well, certainly Kennedy's assassination not only affected me, it affected my children very strongly. I mean, they were very young, but one of my sons, who is a political activist right now, remembers clearly, and he was probably 7, 8 years old when Kennedy, I think from then on, he became very, very active.
Right.
And had a huge effect on us.
Now, your husband Paul passed away. You remarried a gentleman by the name of Reuben.
Yes.
What was the happiest time in your life?
The happiest time in my life was when we lived together. As I'm talking about my husband and I with our children in Dallas. We were still pretty much, and we still are, a very tight family unit. But I think those years were the happiest. We were building, and our children were building and getting into their careers and so on. And
now, your children, you mentioned the one child is a political activist. What are your other two kids?
I mean, he's more than a political activist. The Kennedy part definitely inspired him in that direction. But he has, he's an attorney, and he has been behind a lot of some of the wonderful things that we do now have and enjoy in Dallas.
And your
our
other
Jewish
two
community.
children, what did they get into?
They're also very productive in that area. My oldest son, David, has been also very involved in community, very involved with Israel, lived in Israel for for a year after graduating from high school, went to Israel to live on a kibbutz and work. Came back and went back for another year, and eventually went back for graduate school, and has been a very pro-Israel activist, as has all three of them. My youngest son also doesn't live in Dallas, he lives in Baltimore, and he also has been very involved in his community, in anything that has to do with Israel or civil rights. All three of them, I would say, are very strong advocates for civil rights. David, my oldest son, David, who lived in Israel for so long, was instrumental in forming a congregation that I belong to, he belongs to. Now, he was the first president of Anshe Torah, a congregation that's in Plano. My boys have been very, very involved in the growth.
7 grandkids. And when you think your lifetime, how you were raised, and all you've been through, and how kids today, all the advantages they have, what advice does Grandma have for the next generation?
Do your own thing. Know where you want to go and follow your dreams.
You did a great job.